And welcome back to our final panel of today's Sport Techie Showcase on baseball tech, pitch repertoire, and design. As this is the closing panel, hopefully we'll have some Craig Kimbrell heat and spike curves for you, and we'll tell you how to throw them. I am thrilled to introduce this panel. We have Casey Mulholland, the founder and lead developer of Kinetic Pro Performance and a former minor league pitcher. Devin Rose, a throwing trainer at Driveline Baseball, who played at Arizona Christian and a few other schools and a little bit of indie ball. And also Nate Pavelchuk, who is currently a pitcher in indie ball with the Milwaukee Milkmen, and he's a former Chicago White Sox draft pick as well. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
All right. As you've seen in the earlier panels, we've got a few mini presentations for you, and we'll kick it off with Casey to let us all know what he's doing down in Florida. You're on mute.
Thanks, Joe. Obviously, our topic today is pitch design. Going through a couple of things. At Kinetic Pro, we're located in Tampa, Florida. Work with a lot of guys, number of different aspects of pitching. But in today's discussion, obviously, going to cover our pitch design component, some of the work that we've done with some of our guys. So, I think there's this kind of aura around pitch design. It's become really popular here. In the last, 5 years, 6 years. Actually saw it for the first time up at Driveline when Trevor Bauer up there, got kind of his first Edgertronic camera, was training there at the time, and got to play around and see pitches in slow motion for the first time and really kind of debate the physics of what a pitch was doing. Previously it was coaches handing down this oral tradition of things that worked and kind of spaces that helped guys understand little cues and tricks out of their toolbox to learn better curveballs or more effective sliders. When we got to really see things for the first time and break it down, we got to kind of really dive deep into understanding, okay, maybe I need to change my grip for this reason. Instead of just a feel thing or perceptually seeing it this way, the ball's not spinning the way that I think it is, so maybe we can adjust it. Flash forward a couple years later, I finished playing and got into what we're doing now at Kinetic Pro, training athletes. And we started to formulate processes and trying to figure out how we can best aid athletes and things like pitch design. So in our pitch design space, we have a quote that we like to throw around a lot of our players. We say we're aiming to develop great pitchers, not just great pitches. And I think, we've got a lot of players today that really are invested in the data, understand the data, and this data can help our guys excel on the field. However, if we get too caught up into one thing, we kind of lose the big picture as to what it really means to be a great pitcher. And so we're trying to help guys get that 1% better, try to find that one thing that may unlock the movement of a pitch to make it more effective in a game, maybe raise whiff percentage in a season. But we're not trying to always build the nastiest pitch out there unless it's most effective for that athlete on the field. So we have this process, we call it assess, design, compete. And basically what we're doing with our guys is we assess them first and foremost. So we'll take online data from them. We'll try to evaluate, what they're doing in the seasons during the year while they're competing. And we'll basically go through that assessment phase and sit down together kind of before the off season and say, hey, here's where we're seeing some maybe limitations. Here's where you're getting hurt. So from there, we go to the design component, which may mean grip change or looking at a better pitch selection or a better pitch to maybe throw in the repertoire, and then from there we bring it back to competition. So we'll break it down with a Rapsodo before in the design phase or a TrackMan in the design phase, and then we'll send it off to the competition side of things, measure it, track it, see if it got better against competition, and then we'll go back through that process again over and over. So I have an example here I wanted to use. There's some videos that we brought through of two pitches here. It's one athlete. His name's Stephen Hager. He's at University of Michigan looking at the draft this year. And so Stephen came in the wintertime. We worked on a curveball together. And you'll see on the left is a video of his curveball spinning. So the first one you see here is a curveball spinning, maybe with low efficiency. And this video you see more high spin efficiency for that curveball. We can talk more about that in our discussion today, kind of about how we got there. And maybe some of the components of what made that pitch change and then how effective it was during season, again, going back through our process. So that's pitch design for us. That's kind of a 10,000 foot view of it. As we dive in and get deeper into the physics and the understanding of what we're actually trying to create, it allows us to kind of individually create plans for our players to move forward and be their most effective on the field.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Casey. And then the floor is yours, Devin.
All right. So for those, like you mentioned, I'm at Driveline Roddenkin, Washington. Casey kind of talked on like the pitch design process as a whole in terms of like assessing a pitch. Then we want to try and train that and then reassess at the end. I wanted to kind of touch more on like breaking balls specifically. So more like cutters, sliders, any variation in there, and like how do we assess good or bad within that range and relative to that athlete. So something we look at here is not just like what are the pitch metrics now relative to like big league average, but also for that athlete where their fastball velocity is as well. So big league average right now for a slider is roughly around like 9 miles off and like 6-7 inches of sweep. So we basically bucket athletes in a sense by, is this guy really good at holding supination or like getting around the ball, throwing really good breaking balls, or does he kind of struggle with that? We're going to be more dependent on having to throw that pitch hard instead of maybe having like outlier movement characteristics. A couple guys that come to mind are going to be like your Dylan Maples or Blake Trinans, who they take off relatively like average velocity from their fastball, but they're getting well above average movement for the amount of velocity they have to take off. So Dylan Maples is going to get like over double the league average sweep on his slider, but he's still only taking off roughly the same velocity as the average pitch. So when we go through that process with the athletes here, what we'll typically have them do is take whatever their grip is for their cutter, slider, may make some adjustments to it, but then we're going to play around in those first few sessions of let's get a couple where you're seeing like how hard you can throw it. Maybe it gets a little bit more backspin, a little bit more cuttery, but how much velo can you pick up versus gaining lift? And then on the reverse, like how much movement can you gain and kind of assess that trade-off for each athlete and what maybe the most like optimal range for them is to maximize both the velocity component, but also the movement. So one example we had this offseason was a minor leaguer from the Dodgers, and he came in with he called it a cutter, but it was basically just a backspinning like almost a Tyler Glasnow fastball movement profile, not really any sweep, like 15, 16 inches of lift, and it was like 5 miles off of his fastball. And he was pretty happy with it, but what we ended up finding out through that process is that he could actually kill a lot of lift, a lot of backspin, get more depth on the pitch, and only take off another 2 miles per hour. So when we look at that pitch relative to his fastball, where he can actually get a little bit more sweep, get more depth on the pitch, and only take off 4 or 5 miles per hour off of his fastball, that for him was like the better choice over this one that he could throw maybe a tick or two harder, but the movement just mirrored his fastball a little bit too much. That was really like the main point I wanted to touch on, is just like when you're going through that process of finding a breaking ball, play around with the shape and velocity a little bit and try to find what is that ideal trade-off for yourself. And usually we see it's some combination of the grip, but also just that like the actual intention of trying to get around the baseball and like try and make it move essentially.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Devin. And Nate, as an active pitcher who coincidentally enough worked out with Casey a bit last winter. First of all, what's in your pitch mix now, and how much has that evolved in the last year or so? You're also on mute.
So my pitch mix has evolved a lot in the last year. Me and Casey actually did a lot of work together. When I came to Casey, I was basically throwing strictly just cutter, changeup, and then a pretty below average slider. And my whole life, I kind of grew up as somebody who used the slider consistently. Even as a starter, I would throw it probably around 30 to 40% of the time. So a pitch like that for me was really important. When I was with the White Sox, I was really focused on throwing a cutter, and it ended up being a detriment to me because all my pitches ended up turning into cutters. I was getting on the side of the baseball instead of getting on top of it and staying behind it. So my pitch repertoire has evolved from going and using strictly cutter, slider, changeup to now getting back to a true four-seam fastball, a changeup, slider, and then I, in addition, have the cutter now that I throw when I want to instead of on accident. And then just doing work with like stuff like that was super beneficial when it comes to using Rapsodo and using the Acrotech and seeing the actual movement of the pitches. Because to the naked eye, I always thought my fastball was straight, but in reality, it was spinning more similar to cutter than anything else.
What is that iterative process like? You know, so you're on the mound, you're trying to figure this out. You named a few of the devices, but you know, how many? I mean, are you checking the metrics after every pitch, after every session?
For me, in the off season, I'll check pretty consistently. I'm somebody who in season I don't want to focus on that too much if I'm getting outs, because at the end of the day, like that's my job is to go out there and get outs. So as much as I want to focus on that kind of stuff in season, I know that I don't want to be thinking about that on the mound. I just want to go out there and attack. So off season wise, I'll definitely look at it a lot. For me, when it came to fixing the cutter issue I was having, it was done more in catch play than it was on the mound. I feel like catch play was something that really helped me just be able to feel it. I used a device called a Clean Fuego, which is built like a little hockey puck. The whole idea of it is just to stay behind it and you can see immediate results with your eye instead of having to use like a Rapsodo or a Acrotech if that's not available. And using stuff like that during catch play really helped me just develop a feel, and I had immediate feedback and I cut that pitch or I stayed behind it. It was a true four seam. So using catch play was something that was probably the biggest difference for me. Just kind of focusing on the feel of each individual throw.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a sense that four-seam fastball you now throw a bit more versus the cutter? Like, what's the difference in velocity? How much movement changes there?
Yeah, so I mean, currently my velocity is around like mid to low 90s. When I was coming to Casey, my velocity was never much above like 92, just because I was cutting it so bad. Whereas in like my senior year of college, I was all the way up to 96. But when I started cutting the ball, it takes off velocity and made it more difficult to, get that extra velo. Whereas now I'm sitting like mid to low or low to mid 90s. And the cutter velocity is right around like 88 to 90, 91. Whereas the fastball usually sits between like 91 to 95, right around there.
Mm-hmm. And how much does the cutter move comparatively?
Depending on the pitch, but ideally I would like about 2 inches horizontal, 2 inches vertical. Just something with a little depth that looks very, very similar to my fastball. And the reason I wanted a cutter is because I use the slider so much. So if I'm able to throw the cutter, I can throw the cutter, backdoor to a lefty. I can throw it inside on the hands to a lefty, instead of having something big and sweeping, and save my slider for later on in the counts or when I absolutely need it.
Mm-hmm. And so, Devin, when you're listening to what Nate just described, if you were to work with Nate, right now, do you have recommendations? I mean, how much is each, when you're putting together a pitch repertoire, how much of it is based on you needing to see the pitches? Can you just from some of these basic metrics, can you kind of figure out like, oh, hey, this might be a good addition to it? What would be the sort of intake process in starting to work with someone?
Yeah. So initially we do just start kind of with the data that we have. So usually there's a conversation with the athlete ahead of time. That always isn't the case. But we look at the metrics in the past. Have there been drastic changes? Where are we at currently? And then formulate a plan for what we want to do. But in talking with the athlete, sometimes that can just get thrown out the window pretty quick. Either they don't feel comfortable with it. They just don't have the ability to achieve that. We've seen athletes we want to add a breaking ball, and I'm sure every coach they've ever had has told them you need to add a breaking ball, and then they just physically cannot get around the baseball, at least not in the short time span that we have. So that's where the long-term process, you kind of have to make adjustments on the fly. But it's some combination of looking at the data that we have present, looking at trends, changes, setting a plan, and then kind of adjusting as you get that feedback from the athlete, and then also during the sessions.
Casey, and I like what you said about sort of the oral tradition of pitches, and it often seems like pitch design was sort of like addition by anecdote. That like guy in the bullpen saying, "Hey, try this feel." My very undistinguished playing career, I was never even taught a curveball. I just overheard on the sideline someone talking about, "Hey, this is the way I throw it." I tried it on the mound, and it worked well enough that I used it for years. So, how much do you have like a template going in of, "Hey, this is the best practice way of throwing a certain type of pitch," versus having to, whether it's the high-speed video or the data, using it to make the custom adjustments?
Yeah, so there's something called the art of coaching, right? And so we have all this technology in the game today, which is amazing. We get to validate a lot of the things that we've questioned for so long. However, I'll give you an example. One of my favorite coaches playing, I was a guy named Bobby Cuellar, and Bobby was one of my minor league coaches, and he taught Johan Santana his changeup. Pedro gave him credit for his curveball in his book. And Bobby, casually just walking by one day in a bullpen said, "Hey, you like to fish, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "All right, think about taking your thumb like you're casting out a fishing pole, and just take your thumb over the ball for my breaking ball." And that just clicked for me. That was the thing that he had been holding on to. He was from Texas, so he'd done a little fishing, I'm sure, in his lifetime. But that little trick, that little thing that he had probably picked up somewhere, put in his toolbox, and was able to just utilize in that moment, was the art of coaching at its finest. So, you now flash forward to where I'm at today, past my coaching or past my playing career into my coaching career. And you start to look at, when we look at a Rapsodo, how do I take one of those cues and then apply it to get the metrics to do what we're trying to get them to do? So in this case, if I see a guy trying to throw a 12-6 curveball, and there's no other limitations that are going to hold him back, that cue's right in that moment. As a coach, I've been around, I've had the experience, and I've been able to actually take those things and then apply them and help athletes understand conceptually what we're trying to accomplish. So we then monitor it, track it, and apply it. You kind of have those things sitting there for those moments, and that's when you get to see success really come out.
Mm-hmm. And so, Nate, in the last 4 years, and looking at your Baseball Reference page, your final year at Winthrop, a year with the White Sox, and now 2 straight years with different independent league teams, plus your work with Casey. So that's off the top of my head, I'm guessing at least 5 different coaches you've worked with in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
There have been other voices along the way. How do you reconcile all the different voices? How much are you able to kind of take your data with you? How do you find the best fit among all of that?
I think for me, when it comes to coaches, you have to, once you reach a certain level of professionalism, you have to, kind of know who you are. As much as you want to everything to work from the coaching perspective, like coach comes up to you and says, "Hey, try this out." You don't want to beat a dead horse with it, but you want to try everything. If anyone has ever really suggested to me, "Hey, try this with your fastball, or try this with your cutter, try this with your slider," I'm going to try it. And there's certain things that have stuck with me for those, from my pitching coaches with Winthrop. There's some things that have stuck with me from my pitching coaches with the White Sox. I would say it's kind of like a melting pot of information that I've used that have worked for me, and that there's been some things that don't. But you have to understand a certain level of, this is them trying to help you to help them as well. Because these coaches that are helping me are the ones trying to move up as well. So if I succeed, they succeed, and we all succeed. But at the same time, you have to put performance on the field first. So if I don't feel comfortable with something that I've been trying out for a few weeks, I'm not going to bring that out to the mound yet. I'm just going to keep it in bullpens. But when it comes to, the different feels, the different cues, Casey brought up the thumb over the breaking ball. Like he said to me, we were talking and we were working with the slider, and he was telling me, try thinking like Indiana Jones whip and get around the slider. And that cue worked for me. I don't know why. I've never used a whip in my life. But immediately I was able to think of how Indiana Jones did it, and my slider improved because of it. But that was something that immediately clicked, whereas there might be a cue that a coach from my time with the White Sox told me that didn't work then, hasn't worked now, but it's worked for countless other pitchers. So it's kind of you kind of have to have a feel as a professional athlete of saying, hey, step back and this didn't feel right. Maybe let's try a different cue, or let's talk about it a little bit more and see what we can make of it.
Mm-hmm. It does seem like the cues don't have to make sense to work. Like the idea of swing down on the ball, or keep your barrel above your hands, or my favorite, I think Alex Bregman. There's a video of him talking about how he thinks there are flashlights on his legs pointing toward the first base dugout, and throughout his entire swing he wants to keep them pointed toward the dugout, and he's breaking up laughing as he describes this, because he knows that's obviously physically impossible for his swing, but that's how he has to approach the swing so he doesn't spin off too early, right?
Yeah.
And so Devin Driveline have sort of famously kind of made the Edgertronic part of the mainstream baseball, and I remember a few years ago talking to Trevor, and then Dean Jackson and Casey Weathers, and some of those guys who seem to be among the first to really embrace it. How do you use the super slow-mo camera, and how does that help guys understand the cues and what's really happening?
Yeah, so a lot of the time I feel like the camera is just allowing them to work through what they're feeling versus what I'm telling. Every guy internalizes the data, how we share it with them, the cues, everything differently. So if he just sees it on the screen, and then we can work through what we're actually describing, regardless of the words, he can actually add the visual aid. Then they can apply whatever words, whatever feel, cue they want to it. And generally, what we're trying to achieve with that is pretty front loaded, in my opinion, where it's getting them to see and associate good and bad. And then we can use it more intermittently, throughout the rest of the process. But it's pretty front loaded, so they can distinguish good and bad. And then from there, we don't have to check it as much. Pitch metrics, Edgertronic, really any of that information, we're going to have it on, and we're going to be collecting it in case we need it. But it's really getting them to associate good and bad, and then reps, more reps. And that, again, is the art of coaching of, when do I say something? When do I just let him kind of struggle through this, and kind of vice versa?
Mm-hmm. And Casey, you're cracking whips, you're casting a fishing line. What sort of the same kind of question to you? How much do you use the video versus the numbers versus just the trying to describe what's happening?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to this. One is, when we throw bullpens in our facility, there's always a system up and running. Something's tracking the pitches. From the camera side of it, we use it with a lot of our higher level guys more often. Our younger level guys, we're trying to teach them just the basics and trying to give them time as well, because some guys develop. If I have a 14, 15, 16-year-old in at our facility, sometimes those guys just need time to kind of grow into their body and find out what their fastball looks like. And so we try to expand and give appropriate timing of progression through phases. So a guy comes in, might be throwing for the first month, and then building up into bullpens and then doing pitch design after that. We try to systematically implement it, but our systems are always on. So from whether it be cameras or whether it be data, we're always collecting something, trying to accurately show these guys an idea of, if you're 15 years old and just looking at your fastball, it's a great place to start. So maybe figuring something out. To our, bigger guys, the Nate Pearsons of the world, the, Jake McGee's, trying to show them, the intricacies of those single metrics, those single pitches. And I think there's something noted as well there, Joe, and that is that, we have different systems producing different values in our tracking. So when you get these MLB guys, the higher level guys, your ability to be refined with them comes down to the type of technologies that you're using, and that also will dictate kind of what you end up using more often.
What what are the ones that you find most helpful when it comes to the pitch design part?
So Rapsodo is great. We use that predominantly in our facility. We've used others. TrackMan's been really, really good. We have a couple spaces around the area that we utilize TrackMan quite often with our older guys to try to align that data more consistently to what we're seeing on the field. And sometimes that can be just what the organizations use for those guys as well in season. Some organizations utilize Rapsodo for bullpens during season. Others, utilize, TrackMan. Others have their own stuff, which I won't get into. But the idea is that, we're trying to align our abilities to, teach these guys off of consistent numbers. And that's what's really most important.
Mm-hmm. And so, Nate, when you throw in front of a Rapsodo, for instance? How much are you getting? There's tons of chatter. You can't go, single baseball game without hearing about spin rates, spin efficiencies, and so forth. How much are you looking at those spin numbers?
For me, I'm usually looking at the spin numbers when it comes to like changeup and slider. Just because I have difficulty throwing changeups, throw from a 3/4 arm slot. My changeup usually comes out a little harder than I want to. So if I can look at the spin rate and see that my spin rate's lower, then I know that obviously my velocity on the pitch is going to be lower. And then you have to, put into perspective as well. Like, I'm not somebody that can go out there and throw as hard as I do in the game just to a bullpen. I need to have hitters in front of me. I need to have that little bit of adrenaline of getting somebody out to tap into that velocity. I've always been that way. I'm not really sure why. But when it comes to looking at spin rates, like I know when my slider's spinning at 3,000 RPMs, that it's much better than when it's spinning at 2,600. So if I throw a pitch and I've been struggling with the slider and I go to the Rapsodo and I see, oh, okay, like that one's spinning at 2,650. And then I throw another one and try to loosen the grip and hold it a little bit like an egg. I know that's something that Tyler Glasnow uses a lot and something that works for me as well. The looser I hold it, the better spin rate I get, the harder break I get, and actually the more velocity that is on the pitch as well. So it's just like what cues can I use on different pitches and how does that affect the actual spin of the baseball just by me thinking in a different way. So, and then if those cues work, I'm bringing them out to the game with me. And that's something I'm telling myself in between pitches, like, all right, we have a slider here, hold it like an egg, just get out front with it. And then I'm going to bring that into the game and use it live against hitters.
Mm-hmm. Great. By the way, all this wonderful behind the game insight, a lot of you will be able to find it on the newly launched Just Baseball site as well. Nate will be helping out there as well. And it's going over to Devin. It's the same sort of question. We hear about spin rates on fastball, sliders, and so forth, but also how much do you look at the spin axis, spin efficiency? How does that all work in, especially for those in the audience who may be new to some of these concepts?
Yeah, so for each athlete, we'll try and find like the one thing that we want them to kind of hit on. When we're evaluating it as like the trainer or the coach, we're going to look at it kind of like all as a whole. Most of the time we're interested in like the actual movement and then velocity, but we know that like the inputs that go into that are going to be spin efficiency, where is the spin direction, the axis. But when we're translating that and like sharing the information with the athlete, we typically find for like each pitch type, we're going to find one metric, maybe two, that's going to be on that actual screen for them to focus on. So like where Nate said, he's throwing in the bullpen, he's looking at like spin on his slider. If we have a guy come in here and we're working on his changeup, rather than throw a bunch of different metrics at him, we're going to single it down to one on that screen. And then also say like, we always have TrackMan Mobile and Rapsodo running simultaneously for our guys in pitch design. And like Casey touched on, different orgs use different tech. They communicate it in a different way. They display it to the athletes in a different way. So we try to tell them if they have this one out there, this is what you should look at, since they measure and display things differently. If they have the other unit out there, this is the number you should be looking for, and try to narrow it down as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. And Casey, when you are working with some of those younger athletes that you mentioned, how much can there be? How can you sort of navigate around the paralysis by analysis, like overwhelming them? They hear the big leaguers talking about it. What should a middle school and high school pitcher be thinking about? And maybe those are two very different things anyway, but how do you work with a younger pitcher on this?
Yeah, so we don't actually do a ton of work with younger guys. We're looking at the future. And so I don't really have a ton of experience there. However, when we talk about bringing on younger athletes, we have worked with a few, and typically a lot of our work resides outside of that technology. So it's great for us as coaches to be able to reference that technology. But things like, Nate mentioned like a puck ball earlier, being able to, have a younger athlete, pick up a puck ball and play catch with it and analyze the spin, see the ball out of the hand, feel that. That's what's really, I think, important. And you can challenge and create, gamification around that as well for younger athletes, which is really important. So, when you're able to do that, when you're able to kind of create that gamification model, have a modality that might, encourage good habits, I think you're in a winning situation with younger athletes.
Mm-hmm. And Nate, as someone who, is obviously of a generation where you're able to use this for a few years, but like, what would you say to someone who's 5, 6, 7 years younger than you? How much, how deep should you get into this? And obviously there'll be some, each individual is a little different, but what do you think?
I think nowadays, especially with recruiting for college, it's extremely important. The budgets of college baseball programs don't allow people to travel to all these different games. You got COVID thrown into the mix now that doesn't allow coaches to go to certain places without having to quarantine or all that different stuff. So being able to have physical hard data as a junior or senior in high school is extremely important to be able to send to colleges and to show, hey, this is what I can do. If you can get it in game, it's even better because then it's as legitimate as possible. I think that sometimes it's overstressed a little bit. I don't think that a kid should go out to the mound thinking, oh, I have to throw this pitch, 3,000 RPMs on a curveball so that I can send this data to the college coach. I think there has to be a level of this is a baseball game, and you can't always focus on the data, but the data is there to help you become the best player that you can possibly be. And in today's world, with all the stuff that we have available to us, the tools available allow us to become infinitely better. I mean, you can just see it in the game today. Look at Jacob deGrom throwing 102 into the 7th inning. It's extremely impressive what these guys do, but they've found a happy medium from focusing on getting outs to, hey, how can I improve this pitch, or where does this pitch in the zone work most effectively? So when I'm talking to high school kids, I always tell them, hey, work on the little things as much as you work on your data. Work on the mental side of baseball, but in addition, use the data to help you advance your career and advance you as a baseball player.
Mm-hmm. And Devin, when we're putting together a pitcher's repertoire, certainly it's important to, it's obviously at least very helpful to have some good tunneling. What's the best way for a young pitcher to work on tunneling to sort of disguise his pitches? What's the starting point?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is kind of using feedback from the hitters or your catcher, kind of asking them, like, am I giving away a certain pitch, like breaking balls? Are you like drastically changing your arm slot? You can use the tech as well. Like if you have slow-mo footage every time and you overlay those, you can see pretty quickly. But I think for younger guys especially, some of that also like comes with age and experience and throwing, but like use your catcher, use the people you're facing, get that feedback of like, is there something drastic? The minor changes, I don't think like younger athletes necessarily should be like overly critical of them. But like as guys get older, the hitters also usually pick up on like more fine details. So still using feedback from them, using the feedback from the catchers in terms of actual like tunneling of the pitches, I think is one way to do it. With the tech, I would mostly rely on like the slow motion, like the camera footage, and trying to overlay and see if you're drastically changing anything in that manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same question to you, Casey. How do you work on tunneling?
Yeah, I mean, Devin hit on most of it. I think a lot of it, like you said, comes down to asking great questions to the people that you're facing, and utilizing the technology. So, having a Chronos camera or an Edgertronic camera, being able to kind of pair those up and see those pitches in real time, that's a huge win. Also looks cool on social media, so always cool to have there. But nonetheless, yeah, it's just kind of putting those two together and also trying to figure out what does my fastball do to design pitches that might best tunnel off of that. So I think starting off with a fastball evaluating the fastball and then moving to the rest of the repertoire. It's kind of key in that process.
Mm-hmm. And so, Nate, how far down the 60 feet 6 inches do your pitches tunnel?
So for me, I mean, I'll use tunneling in game a lot. I don't think there's ever like a really like a bad pitch unless you throw it to the backstop. I mean, if I throw a fastball that's like off the plate to a lefty, I know that just set up a slider backdoor or a cutter backdoor because they're gonna see that ball out of my hand and go, like probably fastball away again. But when it comes to pitch tunneling for me, I want my pitches to look as similar as possible as far down the mound as I can go. I want them to be late moving. I want them to look the exact same out of my hand so that when the hitters are in the box, they can't just read and go, oh, his arm angle increased on this. This is a curveball. Or, he's slowed down his motion. He kind of pushed the change up. I'm trying to make sure everything from my end looks the exact same for as long as possible, which usually leads to my pitches looking as similar as they do, as far down towards the plate as I can get them.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about the overall offerings, Devin, how much is there sort of a template? How much of it is sort of formulaic where, hey, if you have a good high spin rate fastball that you can throw at the top of the zone, you want to pair with this tumbling curveball at the bottom, or mixing the cutter, slider, change? How much of it is, we know this pitch works, so you should use this one, or is it, again, largely too individual to do that?
Yeah, I think there's an individual component to it for sure. Both like what hitter are you throwing to and also the pitcher. I think as you go up level of competition, the hitter probably becomes more important in that manner. You have like more scouting reports and can see tendencies. Obviously, like knowing which of your pitches have like the best stuff. So like velo and movement is going to help. I probably want to throw my better ones more, but if I just see that there's a hitter I'm facing and like he hasn't come close to a breaking ball all day, and maybe my breaking ball is not my best pitch, like there's no need to mess around and try and like get too fancy with it. Just throw 3 breaking balls if he's not coming close to them. Like Nate kind of touched on too, I know something we talk about with the athletes here is they get like super, super fine with like, where should I throw this pitch? And it's like, you don't have elite command. Like if we're being completely honest, you don't have elite command. You need to set like an area and like understand you probably have a spray zone, if you want to think of it like that, and then kind of play off of that. So if you miss up, then maybe that works better for like a bigger like 12-6 breaking ball, or you're going to go up again. Or if I miss low, then I'm going to run the slider off the plate or change up. I think that's like kind of the way we share that information with the athletes is just like, don't be too fine. And you don't always have to have the plan like scripted out completely ahead of time, like be able to adjust on the fly.
Mm. And we've also seen fastball rates go dramatically lower in the big leagues. Some guys are now, primarily, off-speed pitches. I think if you throw your changeup more than your fastball, I don't know if it's really a changeup anymore. But Casey, when you're similar sort of question to you, like when it comes to usage and pairing, what should younger athletes know about it?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about our MLB guys, they're going to be obviously substantially different than our younger guys, just because the sheer amounts of data that we're able to intake on those guys. So a good example is we have a guy named Austin Adams who's with the Padres in the big leagues, and he uses the slider predominantly. I mean, more than 70% of the time. So runs it, anywhere from 88 to 91 miles an hour. It's an elite level pitch, and he knows that he's going to get guys out at that level with that pitch. The younger level, oftentimes you're trying to find with the younger athletes, do you have a pitch that is that elite? Because if you do have a pitch that's that elite, that creates that much swing and miss, we're going to use it a lot more, whether that be the fastball. Jake McGee is a great example of that. I think he set the league record for most consecutive fastballs thrown over a span of time at one point with the Rays. And when you watch his fastball, you understand why. And so, you have guys like that that just have freaky stuff that is really good, and you can quantify it with obviously the technologies. But at a younger level, you're trying to help the guys understand, am I more of a horizontal guy, more of a vertical guy? Meaning that, do I throw more from the side, or do I throw my slot more over the top? Do I create a lot of vertical break with the arm slot that I have, and obviously the spin components that I have? And then how can I use that to design pitches? And what you might find is, once you've kind of established that slot in terms of movement profile of the mechanics, once you've established that slot that spin with the pitch, then you can kind of start to evaluate it. But at a younger age, you're really trying to put those pieces together. Guys are not always the best movers at a younger age. They have to learn how to control their body and create a consistent or repeatable mechanic. And in that case, that's going to affect what we're ultimately trying to do with that pitch. So until we can see that consistency, it's kind of hard to say you should go one way or the other. We try to give it time, evaluate the athlete year over year, and set goals for them to help push them in the right directions. So.
Mm-hmm. And the other technology to sort of go away from the fingertips of the pitch design down to the elbow with the Motus. I know you're a big user. How do you how does Motus play into this? Tracking pitch intensity. Does that play into the actual pitch design, or is that more on your overall workload?
It's more on overall arm health. Casey really got me back into it again. And I fell in love with Motus. I think it's a really, really good product, especially for upper level athletes. I mean, I know for me in college, when I came back for Christmas break, it was hard to find people to throw with. Whereas if I have the Motus, it's not the same, but it's really, really close. I can actually take the arm sleeve, go throw in a cage, and mimic a complete long toss day session with just an arm sleeve on and nobody else to play catch with. For someone like me, I love to throw. So I want to throw. I don't take many off days. Even in season, I'm probably not throwing maybe one day at most in a week. Most of the time I'm throwing 7 days a week. So to be able to monitor the actual workload of, hey, like why was my arm more sore on Tuesday than it was on last Wednesday after I threw? I have quantifiable data to tell me like, hey, you had a much higher workload than you had the previous time. In addition, it tells you things that you don't really know. Like I grew up in college and I was told to throw a flat ground after every time I played catch. Not like high intensity or anything like that, but I found out through Motus that throwing a flat ground was actually more stressful on my arm than just getting on a mound and throwing a bullpen. So now instead of throwing flat grounds, I just get on the mound and throw bullpens, which is less stressful on my arm and probably arguably more beneficial for me. Whereas if I'd never used this product, I wouldn't have been able to find something like that out.
Yeah, amazing. And Driveline Baseball acquired the Motus sports sensor. So Devin, the question goes over to you. How do you suggest athletes use Motus?
Yeah, I think the main thing is obviously tracking workload over like long periods of time, kind of tying it into like the pitch design side. And this is something that I know Casey does a really good job of, and who I kind of learned it from was like the dynamic throwing programs, like being able to adjust the like actual itinerary for your throwing that day within constraints of like your workload, the intensity, all of those parameters. So you have a guy who like really needs to get work done on the mound. He needs to work on his off speed, command, whatever. Maybe I don't need him to long toss at all or as much. I can change his throwing program and still feel confident that I'm not putting him in harm's way, but we're getting way more volume and more reps on the mound where I think it's going to benefit him the most. And I think in baseball, that's going to be like some pushback where like it's hard. You grow up thinking like, all right, the mound's the most stressful thing I do. You can't throw on the mound every day. You can't do whatever else I have to do. Exactly 10 throws with this ball in this drill every single day. And it's like, it's not that binary. Like there's a lot of gray area and you can kind of mix and match things to your needs. And I think that's like the real benefit to it.
Mm-hmm. And, I assume you can even, if you learn using Motus that a certain pitch throws an undue amount of stress on your arm that, while you're designing pitches, maybe you designed it a little bit differently. Does that seem like a fair assessment as well? Devin?
Yeah, we haven't done as much with like pitch level analysis in that, but potentially there is something with, like, if you want to call it efficiency, like the unit of stress and velocity or workload. Maybe there is something down the road where we see guys who throw this percentage of their like high intensity throws with like this pitch, and it's more stressful. They feel more sore afterwards. It takes them longer to recover, things like that. But we haven't necessarily done much with that to date.
And Casey, over to you. I'd love to learn a little more about how you work it in, like as Devin described, into the dynamic throwing program.
Yeah, so kind of the key when we talk about pitch design, pitch design is a phase. And so if we think about it in the sense of an off season, typically an athlete will shut down, then they build up. And with Modus, you're able to track that progression. So we're measuring fitness over time. Think about it like if you're preparing for a marathon, you kind of start off with 1 mile and then you go to 2 miles and 2 miles and 3 miles. When we throw, it's really we're building arm endurance. That's what we're really trying to establish early, especially in the off season. And so for our ability to get to a pitch design phase, we have to be able to handle the load of a bullpen. We have to be able to handle the load of a long toss to get ourselves adequately prepared enough to actually get in and get that work done for the day. So there's this kind of off-season progression that may take about, generally we see about a month and a half, 2 months to get to that spot. And then from there, we can really kind of go full intensity to work through those pitches. I talked to a lot of our guys coming out of season. We'll spend that early phase of the off season, with whatever is allotted in terms of our workload. We're able to work through, breaking pitches, as Devin kind of talked about, and Nate kind of talked about. You can really mix and match intensities. You can really mix and match these torque values in terms of what throw creates and produces this higher torque versus lower torque, and design these throwing days dynamically where, today I might have, 70 throws based upon these different areas. I can choose a short box and a long toss and kind of get some work on my curveball. Tomorrow I might just play light catch, but we can kind of start to quantify that, objectively plan that over a longer period of time, and then allow ourselves to, maintain that as we get into season. And that's kind of the key is, if you do have issues in season, pitch design doesn't stop as you get into season. You can still work on stuff in season, but we need to know what our load looks like to make sure that we're not just throwing 100 breaking balls or 100 fastballs today, and it doesn't fit inside of our daily allotment. We want to make sure that we stay safe, mitigate fatigue, and continue on staying healthy throughout the season.
All right. Well, this has been awesome. This has been a great conversation. Casey, Nate, Devin, thank you very much for your time. And to the audience, thank you very much for being with us today. This has been the Sport Techie Showcase on Baseball Tech, and we really appreciate it.